Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our first live creator chat of the day with comic creator Jeremy Holt. Before we begin, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys know what our format will be like. I'll be starting with some interview questions, but please remember that this is an interactive chat, and we encourage you to ask Jeremy as many questions as you would like throughout our discussion. I'll be keeping an eye out on the text chat and reading any questions you post throughout the session. And now that that is out of the way, let's get started. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Um, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a comic book writer. I've been writing comics for, I guess, over a decade now. I do tech support by day, and yeah, that's about it. I'm a Korean triplet adoptee.
What is it like being a part of a triplet? That's quite a large number of kids to look like you.
Yeah. It's no different than having other siblings. I think the misconception is that people think that I'm like looking at two versions of myself, which is not how that works.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is a very unique experience to interact with people who are convinced you are somebody else. Like they will almost argue with you. You're like, no, 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 you're thinking of my brother.
I suppose that is very difficult. I think that it's interesting there that you have an actual person to turn to though, because you could say, well, that's not me. That's actually my brother. That's
Mhm.
fantastic. So you have been working in comics for a while now. How does Made in Korea compare to your other works? For people who might not be familiar with this newest book, can you give us an elevator pitch for it and then sort of talk about how the story evolved?
Sure. So Made in Korea is set in a world where children no longer are being born.
Hmm.
So a tech race emerges, and people do want to raise children. And a company in South Korea develops the most realistic synthetic children, which they call proxies. So for me, this was kind of an exploration into the complexities of identity and adoption through the eyes of the world's first true AI system named Jessie. So for me, this was just kind of my attempt to write an AI story, while also exploring my own feelings about being a transracial adoptee.
Mhm. Was it difficult to put a lot of yourself into this story? Not everyone works in sort of an autobiographical format when they write. And I'm wondering, had you done that before? Was this the first time? And did it present any unique challenges along the way?
Great question. Actually, it wasn't my first time. My first attempt at that was with the previous book called Virtually Yours, which I did with Comixology Originals. That story, I basically explored my feelings of honestly being in a abusive marriage for about 3 years, which I wrote, strangely enough, into a romantic comedy. And I kind of wanted to show that lots of people can experience abuse in all different forms. So once I did that, and it really did resonate with readers. Main Korea kind of was like the natural next step to focus on something that I've been thinking about my entire life, which is being adopted and being Asian American and experiencing the Asian diaspora. And so it was actually a pretty natural fit. And honestly, it's made writing more fun for me when I weave my own personal conflicts and struggles into my narratives.
Do you ever surprise yourself later when you're reading work that you've put together? Like once you've got these ideas out and worked them out on the page, do you ever go back and read something that you've wrote and find an insight into yourself or into your own process that you didn't realize was there from the beginning or didn't intend?
Yeah, I think every single book I write, my goal is for it to be better than the previous one.
Mhm.
My writing process is one that I basically learned from my friend Joe Casey, who's another image creator. And the process he kind of showed me that he uses, I save dialogue for the very last aspect of the process, and it keeps the dialogue fresh. But the side effect of that is I don't actually really remember what I write. So when I go back and read some of the dialogue, I sometimes am impressed, like, whoa, I wrote that? That's a pretty good line. Um, but generally speaking, I think that I've really gotten a lot of good feedback from readers, and it's really awesome to see their take on my books, and it kind of opens my eyes to perspectives that I wasn't otherwise aware of when I was making them.
Mm. I think that's a really nice thing about making art, is that it is a relationship that you engage in with the audience and with yourself. So I think that some people can think of stories as a solo act, but with comic book creation, it's very literally not most of the time. And then you factor in the artistic sort of dance that you're doing. I think that's wonderful. Um, so in terms of AI, this is sort of not your first foray working uh, with personal aspects of yourself in a story, but it's also not exactly your first foray working with, technology and relationships between people and the vagaries and the messiness of that. But in this story, you're working with a child. Did that present any particular challenges for you or give you any special considerations, especially considering that the child in question goes through some kind of harrowing things?
Yeah, I think, the rule that everybody hears about is like, write what you know. And so for the last, I'd say 8 years, I've been working IT support within the school system. As you may hear, there's children running around outside my office. So having those experiences and grappling with the reality of what working in a school means in today's society, where active shooter training is something I have to do every year, which was very eye-opening and in a lot of ways very difficult to process. And I was pulling from real life experiences when I was developing the story, developing the conflicts that Jesse is going to run into, both from a perspective of someone, advancing in both, mentally and emotionally. Mm-hmm. And I was working at a public school in Middlebury, Vermont, 3 years ago when this happened. And there was an attempted active shooter at the school, which was thwarted because the police and the parents who got involved took it very seriously. And it was just heartbreaking to go into work on Monday and have these meetings with teachers who were just crying their eyes out. The thought that Monday people were possibly going to be shot by these two eighth graders. And so I've seen this story play out since Columbine in 1999. And so when I was doing research into this, I wanted to understand why people do this as best I could, and to essentially live vicariously through Jesse's character, where we get to see somebody do something in those moments that we haven't seen done before. Mm-hmm. And I think that just the stark contrast of a child or a seemingly young person taking on a very adult responsibility, I thought was a very interesting twist.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating as well, because you have not only you're depicting this experience, and as you said, sort of living vicariously in this experience, which is a very terrifying reality for so many people because the consequences can be so final. And it's fascinating to look at it through the eyes of both a child and a being that is exploring humanity for the first time, because children don't necessarily grasp the consequences of the actions that they can engage in. That's a really interesting way to explore something that Americans are grappling with.
Yeah, I wanted to explore the idea of indoctrination, about peer pressure, about what it means to be a family, and what it means to be a parent. And the conflict outside of Jessie as a character are her adopted parents and her maker, and who stakes claim to that. And as an adoptee, this is a conversation that has been being had within these communities for generations, where I've met adoptees that don't align with their adopted family, or ones that do, or ones that find their bio parents, and it's a really complex journey, and something that I definitely have focused on in the last few years. And it was important for me to tell this story from two different perspectives, one from the American side and one from the Korean side, just to kind of give a glimpse for readers to know what it's like to just, for a character to straddle both worlds that are very different.
Yeah. I think it increasingly in our generation, we have been having more conversations than I at least have been privy to with generations past about what it means to craft your own identity when you come from several different sort of ethnic or cultural origin points. And I think we're used to talking about what it means to be a mixed person in American society, which is already a weird concept for a country that talks about being a melting pot all the time. Um, but I don't necessarily think that all of your readers will be as intimately familiar with identity when you talk about it from the transracial adoptee perspective. That's a very particular type of identity. Do you have any ideas or concepts that you're really hoping that readers will take away from this? Or is there anything that you'd like to express now that you think that the audience might not know about this experience?
Well, I think that for me, I've loved science fiction for a long time, specifically artificial intelligence narratives. And I've had this kind of belief that all good AI stories are rooted in an adoption experience. I just haven't seen anybody tackle it directly. I think Spielberg's AI might be the closest, but even that, it just doesn't really quite hit the mark for me. So I think that for people who like these stories, I didn't want to, beat readers over the head with this, like, oh, this is an adoption story, this is an adoption story. But you can see that, the reader's always, the way I've designed it, the reader is always one step ahead of all the characters. So the reader knows what's going on and you're watching it kind of play out. And in a way, I kind of wanted to do this like slow motion car crash where you can't look away. And I think that from the response I've gotten from readers and reviewers, it's the consensus I'm getting is that it's getting people to think about what it means to be human, and that some of the human people in this story act with less humanity than the main character that's supposed to be a robot.
It's sort of that what you've created is similar, I think, in the way the reader interacts with the character, to, at least for me, to how I feel about characters like Data from Star Trek, how you can be watching all of these people making these insane decisions, and the only person who seems to make any sense is the AI.
And the thing that what I love about this story, the layerness of it, is that, Jessie, just like anybody else, she just knows herself as herself. She doesn't think of herself as any different. Like, I certainly didn't think of myself as othered or different growing up. And in the last few years, I've definitely leaned into my Asianness and have come to understand and unpack, the white narratives I grew up with, and some color blindness in my family, and, addressing these things that are kind of really hard to grapple with. And so for Jessie, she doesn't know any better than what she knows. And everybody assumes she's one thing when she knows she's something else. And it was really fun to play with that dichotomy and to see how the characters react and play out their stories.
Yeah, it is a very human story, and an especially very like pre-adolescent adolescent story is the I know who I am and I'm trying to tell you who I am, and will anyone listen to me? You mentioned that the dichotomy between the American parents and then the Korean maker, and I wanted to hone in a little bit on that, because I think it's so interesting how it plays into that old chestnut of your parents, they F you up. They don't mean to, but they do. And I see a lot of good intentions, or people being very sure of what they're doing is as being the right thing, and they still manage to kind of donk it up. Can you talk about that, and sort of whether that relates also to your own life of having been a child and now having working, as you say, with kids around all the time? Do you see this, and how does it relate to your work?
I mean, I will admit that I am not a parent, so I can't take ownership of knowing what that's like. I do have 5 siblings, 3 of which have children, so I've asked them about it, and I've seen just through my own eyes what it's like for them to raise their kids and the different parenting styles. And I think that with this story, it's this weird thing of ownership, and I wanted to show you know, what parenthood means in the 21st century, and what it means with something as complex as a, a sentient robot. And I think it's just been, I tried not to tell narratives that I'm not totally familiar with from a firsthand perspective. So I was basically just writing more about my experience of otherness through Jesse, and the idea of never really fitting into one culture or one society or whatnot. And as a non-binary person, that was also very informative to get to explore my feelings about, what it means to be something that is very important to me and that transgresses a lot of the norms within my own family. So I just kind of used those and pivoted away from just parenthood, which I don't have any firsthand experience with, and more about just my own feelings about my childhood and what I would have loved to have seen happen if I could do it over again, and kind of basically parent Jesse as the narrator.
I think that's a really good way to put it, because as an author, you are parenting all of your characters, and it must be odd sometimes to write yourself these literary children and then watch them grow up throughout the narrative. I think that's a
I think
great
it's a good sign of good writing, in my opinion. I mean, I am creating a world featuring characters that basically I want to hang out with. If I don't want to hang out with them, they're not going to be interesting enough for people to read. That's just how I've always looked at it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way to look at it. When you're collaborating with other creators, since you're not making this comic on your own, what is the process like? How do you go about selecting another artist, or colorists or letterers to help bring these stories to life? Because if you're creating a child, essentially, a literary offspring for yourself, you have to make sure that the other parents involved have sort of a similar vision.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. I feel like the collaboration with my creative teams, and I've worked with different artists on the, with the exception of one book, I've worked with a different artist on my 7 publications at this point.
Mhm.
And I think that early on, it was very hard to find collaborators. That's since become easy now that I have a resume. But it's oftentimes either through word of mouth, through other writer friends that I know that I have, small group ties with, and then we're always kind of exchanging names of artists we're looking out for or know about. But beyond that, you got to make sure that the relationship works from day one, and it's not any different than any other relationship in one's life. You have to have clear communication. You have to set expectations, and if it starts to go awry, because there are a lot of hands in the pot, depending on what the team is comprised of. I mean, in Korea, I feel lucky because it was really just me, George, the artist, and Adam, the letterer. George not only drew, but also colors all of their own work. So it kind of simplified the process there. But I have definitely canceled projects because, team members weren't getting along and I was having to kind of play HR. And it's just like, if we can't even be on the same page before we pitch it, like, I don't want to be tied together or tie us together when we're butting heads constantly. So,
Yeah. No, I think that's very healthy. I also, anecdotally, even though I very much appreciate HR so much, I can't think of a worse fate than having to play human resources.
yeah, it's not anything anyone told me I was going to have to do when doing creator on comics. Like, you're kind of, you're the writer creator, you're the editor, sometimes you're sometimes the publisher, and manager of the project.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a lot of work. I don't know that people always aware of how much work making your own creator-owned comic is. It's sort of a Herculean task to take on, and especially to see all the way through to the end.
Yeah, it's really not that different than making a movie in a sense. I mean, I went to film school and I joked with myself and with friends that I never ended up using my degree. And it wasn't until my first comic got published that a friend of mine who I went to film school with just called me and said, "You've gotten further than all of us." I said, "What are you talking about? I'm not working in movies." And he said, "This is a movie. Like, it's proof of concept. It's, you wrote it, you cast it, you shot it, you directed it, you edited it, you produced it. It's everything." And so, yeah, I mean, it is a lot of work. I mean, it's like making a movie on a much smaller budget. And you get to kind of see the vision come to life. But Yeah, it's a lot of like management, project management, and you have to have patience because artists can, what I can write in a week or a few days, an artist would take a month to draw at the minimum. So
Yeah, I it always takes longer than you expect it to take.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, Made in Korea, from its inception to it seeing print was about 4 years. I mean,
Wow.
for most of that, maybe 5 years, for a good 3 or 4 years, I just thought this project was going to just stay in the pitch graveyard because really nobody was interested in. And I've loved Image for a long time, and it's the #1 publisher that I wanted to get in with 12 years ago. So of all the stories that I've shared with Image, it's so great that they picked the most personal one to date.
Yeah. Oh, it's a really beautiful story. I mean, that's I one of the things that I also love about Image is that they have a really keen eye for finding stories that are worth telling. And I really appreciate them for it. And I think that they really have a winner on their hands with Made in Korea. It certainly has touched me as a reader in a way that not many of the books that we've released recently have. So really a lovely read and a challenging read, but well worth it.
Thank you.
Um, but talking about your film degree, I think that that is so fascinating because you're not the first comic creator that I have come across who actually got their start in film or who has a background in film. And I'm wondering if there are any, as you're growing now and as you've realized that that is something that you can utilize in this career path, do you find that there are any, not tips and tricks, but skills that you got in school that you can now put to play in a way that you weren't before?
I would say not for me specifically because I went down the sound editing track, so I wasn't.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's a very niche area of the film industry, and I know for a fact I didn't use that degree specifically when making comics. I mean, thinking of sound effects and all that can sometimes help, but for me, it's really kind of the half-life of making comics where, because Made in Korea has done, I think, well for me critically, and it's opened doors that I'm gonna maybe probably sidestep back into that industry because there's opportunities now for me to potentially write within the film and TV space that I never ever thought about doing. And the nice thing about comics is that I can really easily adapt any of my books for that medium. And it's kind of like a nice cheat code.
yeah, yeah. That you get this fully published set of storyboards out to people, fully fleshed out.
Yeah, totally.
That's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that there are opportunities coming up because certainly I would love to see some of this on the big screen or small screen. I don't actually know whether we're supposed to designate big and small screens anymore.
I
I
know
think
because
just
it's interchangeable.
yeah, they're all so big now. So for librarians who might be pitching this to their own, readers, making readers recommendations, are there any read-alike titles or companion titles that you might recommend to them? If this were in a book display, what books would you like to see next to it? And it doesn't have to be a comic, it can be anything, fiction, nonfiction, film, anything like that.
Um, I guess for libraries, depending on the audience, I mean, my biggest inspirations for this book come from films like Chappie, Ex Machina, I Am Mother, Devs on Hulu, all AI sci-fi stories. But as far as books, um, I think specifically with comics like Descender and Alex and Ada are really good um, complements to this. But also, I think I Killed Giants is another one. Just the struggles of growing up and facing certain demons. That book, I cry every time I read it,
Yeah.
and I was attempting to essentially try to make myself cry when writing this, and I have succeeded because I think the fifth and sixth issue really do hit me. Sorry, a light in my office. um, but yeah, so those are the recommendations I would make.
Yeah, I think they're really good ones. I Kill Giants just absolutely annihilates me every time I read it, and I think I've read it at least 3 times now. And Yeah, Made in Korea will definitely, definitely hurt your heart. So
It's
prepare for
I
that.
wanted to be I wanted to be subtle about some of this stuff. And I think that what I would say to librarians and just libraries in general who are interested is that for me, it just comes down to representation matters. And I think that it's important as a Korean adoptee to be getting this story out there, because I just don't see a lot of CADs doing work like this within comics. I've met some in the film industry, which is exciting, and in the fashion industry, but like really not in comics. And I think it's important because there's millions of us, and it's representation that needs to be presented to readers. So, I mean, I did struggle with early on in my career about changing my name to be more Asian sounding, but I realized that this is my name that I've lived with, and I've cultivated a career out of it, and I'm not going to shy away from it. And I think it's now more than ever become important because of, so many Asian creators are getting recognized in pop culture and entertainment, like, Chloe Zhao and Bong Joon-ho and Steve Yeun and Lee Isaac Chung. So it's for me, it's an exciting time to be Asian.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's only going to get better. That's my hope. But we have a question from the audience. They would like to know what about the Dresden Files? Do you feel like there's any inspiration for you in your work from the Dresden Files?
I can't say that I know what that is.
Now
So
we're
I'm
now we're
sorry.
all dating ourselves. Well, thank you for your question. I really do appreciate that. We're coming up a little bit towards the end of our session, so I want to make sure that oh, Catherine Lee says, what a great reflection about your name. So just to share that with you and the audience. Thank you, Catherine. And moving on, where can people find you outside of this event? Where can they find your work, and what can we expect from you in the near future?
I'm easy to follow. It's just Jeremy Holt Books across Twitter and Instagram. And I am excited about a new 8-issue series that I just signed a contract for, which I can't really give more details than that, but excited about that. And I have a new 48-page comic that's being released on Tapas starting on Thursday, which is called House of Sleigh. I was tasked with turning 5 very famous Asian Americans in New York City and turning them into superheroes. So it's 3 fashion designers. It's Prabal Gurung, Philip Lim, Laura Kim, and a fashion influencer, Tina Leung, and a restaurateur, Ezra William, who all banded together and became friends during COVID. And so I was tasked with highlighting their friendship, their vulnerability, and what they're doing for the Asian communities. And it was fun to kind of turn them into superheroes and come up with a superhero mythology. And I'm excited for people to read it.
Yeah, I'm excited to read it. Is there an age, like an audience that it's aimed at that librarians can point to for people who want to access it?
For the new project?
Yes.
It's all ages. Yeah, it's digital only through Tapas now. I don't know if librarians or libraries have access to that yet.
Oh yeah, we everything under the sun, any content under the sun, we love to recommend to people. And web comics and digital content is especially popular with our younger patrons. So that's a fantastic lead.
Yeah, I'd say, thinking about the content, I'd say it's maybe like, I don't know how the designation works with the libraries, but I'd say it's like maybe 12 and up. So, because it does tackle racism and anti-Asian hate, which was a very important thing that these 5 who call themselves the Slaysians wanted to focus on and highlight.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. I really appreciate you being with us today. This has been really illuminating and fun. And just as a reminder to the audience, we are going to go ahead and upload it as soon as the recording has compiled. And you guys can continue to access it as long as the LibraryCon Live environment is up. We'll also be putting it up on YouTube. So please share with your friends and colleagues who were unable to be here today. Jeremy, did you have anything else that you wanted to share before we sign off for the day?
No, thanks for having me. Thanks for your time. And thanks for everybody for tuning in.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you again, everybody, and have a wonderful day.